Horror story. 13 true horror stories. Number 1 story, The Coroner. I used to work in a hospital, in the IT department, and we did a number of overnight rollouts, as well as on-call work, response when issues occurred overnight. Many weird things happened or appeared to happen. The thing that struck me as oddest, was when I saw the coroner running at full speed down the corridor, in the opposite direction, towards the morgue. This guy, an older guy in his 50s or so, was going at full speed. I had never seen him above an amble before, but this time he was really going for it. As he got close to me he yelled, "Out of the way! I got another live one." I am not sure what was more disturbing, the fact that he was dealing with what I could only assume was a deceased body that now appeared to be alive, or the fact he said, "Another." Number 2 story, The Butcher Baker. Robert Hansen was a reliable husband, father, and respected part of Anchorage society. The monarch Red Butcher Baker, however, held many sinister secrets. Between 1971 and 1983, he abducted, assaulted, and slayed at least 17 women aged 16 to 41. Hansen is thought to have commenced homicides around 1972. His modus operandi involved picking up a S*X worker in his car and, while holding her at gunpoint, driving her to his house, where he would pay her. He would then take the victim to a remote location where he would hunt her like a wild animal before finalizing the demise. Hansen admitted that he took pleasure in using a knife and a gun to prey on his victims. Additionally, he acknowledged that he had little regard for women or their feelings. Hansen considered them to be just animals, things to be slain and hunted. In 1983, he was arrested, found guilty, and given a 461-year prison term with no chance of parole. He passed away in 2014 at 75 from natural causes due to lingering health conditions. Number 3 story, The Torture of Sylvia Likens. The homicide of Sylvia Likens was dubbed the worst crime ever perpetrated in Indiana. 50 years later, the title remains. On October 26, 1965, police discovered Sylvia Likens' malnourished body sprawled on a filthy mattress in the Indianapolis home of 37-year-old Gertrude Baniszewski, mother of 7 and the mind behind the girl's horrific demise. The body was covered in more than 150 wounds, including burns and cuts. Reportedly, Likens' body was used as a practice dummy for judo flips and punches, carving words into her stomach with a needle, and many more vicious attacks. Sylvia and her sister Jenny were housed with Baniszewski for $20 weekly by their carnival worker parents. However, Baniszewski beat the females, largely Sylvia, when the checks were late. Why neither Jenny nor Sylvia sought assistance before things got out of hand is, in fact, one of the unsolved mysteries surrounding the case. However, Baniszewski wasn't the only one responsible for Sylvia's demise. A large group of local kids watched or participated in the vicious attacks, along with some of Baniszewski's kids, some as young as 10. Even more astonishing is that all the criminals involved eventually got off on their misdeeds, some following laughably short prison terms. Number 4 story, Donald Henry, Pee Wee, Gaskins Jr. American serial killer Donald Henry Gaskins boldly proclaimed to have stabbed, shot, drowned, and poisoned hundreds of people. Due to his small frame, his friends and relatives referred to him as Pee Wee. He was under 130 pounds and about 5 feet 2 inches tall. Despite asserting that he slayed between 100 and 110 people, investigators never discovered concrete proof of the homicides. 10 of the 15 victims Gaskins was verified to have slain during his lifetime were under 25 years old, and 5 were underage. After attempting self-harm in prison, Gaskins was executed in the electric chair on September 6, 1991. Number 5 story, The Killer Clown. John Wayne Gacy was well known for dressing up as a clown at children's parties, but his clown masks covered a demonic visage. Between 1972 and 1978, he murdered and tortured 33 young men and boys in Cook County, Illinois. Gacy would usually entice a victim to his house and deceive him into donning handcuffs on the pretense of showing him a magic trick. Then, after torturing and **ping his victim, he would asphyxiate or fatally strangle him with a garrote. In Geisha's childhood, he was often named Sissy and Mama's Boy, who would probably grow up gay, since his mother always sought to protect him from his father's abuse. Although Gacy believed he was never good enough in his father's eyes, he continued to adore him nonetheless. In 1949, the father of Gacy received word that he and another boy had been observed inappropriately touching a young girl. His father punished him by giving him a razor strop. The same year, Gacy would occasionally be used sexually in a vehicle by a family friend. The first homicide committed by Gacy was on January 3, 1972, at the age of 29. All of Geisha's slayings were carried out within his ranch-style home close to Norridge, a Chicago suburb. Most of Geisha's victims were buried in the basement of his house. The remains of his final 4 victims were dumped in Wisconsin's Des Plaines River. In 1994, the killer clown was apprehended and executed by lethal injection. Number 6 story, the Icebox Murders Case. In 1965, Fred and Edwina Rogers and their adult son Charles were residing in a peaceful area of Houston. The family tended to keep to themselves, especially with Charles's antisocial and reclusive behavior. In fact, many neighbors were unaware that Charles lived at home with his parents as they never saw him around. A family member inquired that the Houston police check on his elderly aunt and uncle after not hearing from the Rogers for several days. The patrolman saw food on the dining room table but could not find Fred or Edwina. When they opened the fridge, many meat packages were neatly stacked on top of one another. 2 human heads were then discovered in the vegetable bin. When more police officers arrived on the scene, they began to remove the bags of severed body parts from the refrigerator. They were Fred and Edwina Rogers' remains. Autopsies revealed that Fred had sustained a severe head injury from a claw hammer, while Edwina had been severely battered and shot. Fred's genitalia had been cut out, and his eyes had been gouged out. The internal organs of the pair had been flushed down the toilet. There was no sign of Charles. He is the only suspect in the case as of this writing. Charles was ruled deceased in 1975 because no sign of him could ever be located. The case has never been solved. Number 7 story, America's Unknown Child. In February 1957, in Philadelphia, a college student discovered a young boy's remains in the woods and called the police to report his horrifying find. Visibly severely beaten, the boy was found unresponsive inside an old bassinet box. No one knew who the young victim was. Numerous people came forward with information about the crime. Still, the police could not verify any of their claims, and many theories were dismissed. However, the media and police have shown much interest in 2 theories. Each one has been thoroughly examined. In February 2002, a woman, only known as Martha, brought forward one of the main case theories. Martha asserted that the boy named Jonathan was bought from his biological parents in the summer of 1954 by her violent mother. She claimed that the boy experienced physical and carnal torture inside the home. Martha knew of information that had not been made public, raising the police's attention to her statement. The woman claimed that the young boy had baked beans just before being battered to demise, supporting the autopsy findings. She also said that he had been showered just before he passed away, which was consistent with the coroner's discovery of water-pruned fingertips. Although Martha's testimony appeared consistent with the evidence, her extensive history of mental illness rendered her an unreliable witness. The case stays unsolved and is open to this date. The boy remains unidentified, and his grave in Philadelphia at Ivy Hill Cemetery has a large headstone bearing the words, "America's Unknown Child." Number 8 story, The Otaku Murderer. Tsutomu Miyazaki, dubbed the Otaku Murderer, is one of the most infamous Japanese serial killers in history. He was convicted of slaying 4 young girls, aged 4 to 7, in Saitama and Tokyo between August 1988 and June 1989. He kidnapped the girls, slayed them in his car, then mutilated and molested their corpses. He also practiced cannibalism and kept their body parts as trophies. Miyazaki is said to have disassembled one of his victims' bodies, retained her hands, and continued to cannibalize and drink blood from them. In July 1989, Miyazaki was detained in Hachiji after being accosted while photographing a young girl in her underwear. Despite being diagnosed with one or more personality disorders, he was found to be sane and conscious of his crimes and their repercussions. Miyazaki received the most extreme sentence in 1997 and was hanged in 2008. Number 9 story, Botched, Exorcism of Kennedy Ife. In August 2016, Kennedy Ife, 26, of North London, reportedly started acting strangely and aggressively after experiencing throat pain. Before his family restrained him to a bed using cable ties and excessive force, he allegedly bit his father, threatened to cut off his own pee******, and spoke of having a python or snake inside of him. According to his brother, Kennedy needed to be restrained because he would hurt either himself or his family members. After Kennedy had been confined to his bed for 3 days, his brother called emergency services and explained that he had been complaining of dehydration. When the emergency services arrived, he was pronounced deceased at 10:17 a.m. The court was informed that the family spent those 3 days trying to heal Kennedy through restraint and prayer. All 7 of Kennedy Ife's relatives were charged with manslaughter, false imprisonment, and allowing a vulnerable adult to pass away. Kennedy Ife's body had over 60 wounds, including what seemed to be a bite. On March 14, 2019, following a 4-day jury deliberation, all 7 family members were found not guilty of manslaughter. Number 10 story, The Unicorn's Secret. In his adolescence, Ira Einhorn gave himself the moniker, the Unicorn, his German last name translated into English. When he slayed his ex-girlfriend Holly Maddox, Einhorn was an environmentalist and supporter of the anti-war movement. After leaving Einhorn's Philadelphia residence in early September 1977 to collect her belongings, Maddox vanished. When authorities questioned Maddox's ex-boyfriend about her whereabouts a few weeks after the disappearance, he said she had disappeared en route to the local co-op. 18 months later, the police discovered Maddox's partially mummified body in a trunk in Einhorn's closet after neighbors complained to the authorities about a foul stench. Einhorn fled to Europe a few days before he was set to go on trial. As he had previously been arraigned, Einhorn was tried, found guilty, and given a sentence in absentia. Despite this, Einhorn spent 23 years in France and even got married while deftly avoiding extradition. In 2002, the American government was able to repatriate him and reconvict him. Defending himself, he stated that the CIA had slayed his ex-girlfriend and had set him up. Einhorn was convicted and served a life sentence without the chance of parole until he passed away in prison in 2020. Number 11 story, Kidnapping of Colleen Stan. In 1977, Colleen Stan, 20, was hitchhiking from her home in Eugene, Oregon, to a friend's birthday when her abductor Cameron Hooker and his wife Janice picked her up. The following 7 years, Stan would spend a large portion of her time, sometimes up to 23 hours a day, imprisoned in a wooden box without access to light, sound, or fresh air, eating cold food scraps, and using a bedpan. The young woman was also exploited sexually by Cameron using various items. Throughout those 7 years, Stan was occasionally given freedom. She would have to care for her captor's children, cook and clean for herself, was allowed to go jogging, visit her family on her own, and even get a job. Still, she was always kept in place by brainwashing and threats, including claims that a mysterious and dangerous group known as the Company would slay her and her entire family if she tried to flee. But everything changed when Cameron said that Stan should be his second wife. Stan ultimately boarded a bus and escaped to her family. At the same time, Janice cooperated fully and turned in her husband in exchange for immunity. Stan, only a few months away from turning 28 at the time, wasn't free of her suffering until August of 1984. Even then, the many years of torture and brainwashing had kept her from reporting what had happened to the authorities. When the entire story was revealed to the public, it startled not only the police but the world as a whole, spawning hundreds of films, TV shows, and even songs. Number 12 story, The Only Passenger. If you've ever been to Portland, Oregon, you know that our public transportation system is pretty nice, and the MAX system has a tram that runs between the airport and the city center until fairly late at night. I was coming home from seeing my family at Christmas and my flight came in very late, so I was lucky enough to catch the last MAX home. Because it was so late, it was just me, and a guy who looked homeless sitting a few seats ahead of me. He was sleeping with his head against the window. I paid little attention to him but noticed his head lolling around and wondered if he was wasted. Anyway, we get to the city center and there are cops waiting there because apparently the homeless guy sitting in front of me is being escorted off the tram. Airport security had tried to get him off before and thought he was ignoring them and refusing to move. And that's when both the cops and I find out that the guy had been deceased the whole time. He had overdosed at some point before the MAX had even arrived at the airport. We had been riding on that dark midnight ride alone together with one of us fairly deceased. Number 13 story, the Villisca Axe Murder House. For ghost hunters, paranormal activity seekers, and adrenaline junkies, the Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa, is a well-known tourist destination. Paranormal investigators, familiar with the house, declared it among the most haunted locations in America following the summer 1912 mass homicide, right next to 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, where 5 people were slain in the fall of 1974. The case, in which 6 children and 2 adults had their skulls completely smashed while asleep in bed, was never solved and remains a mystery to this day. The location of a horrifying mass homicide was bought in 1994, restored to its 1912 condition, and turned into a tourist attraction. Paranormal investigators who have toured the house have produced audio, video, and visual evidence of paranormal activity in the place shrouded in mystery. Children's voices, falling lamps, moving ladders, and flying objects have all caused tours to end early. But the haunting changed into something more sinister in the fall of 2014. On November 7, Robert Stephen Lorson Jr., 37, of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, had a routinely scheduled paranormal tour with his friends. Lorson was found with a self-inflicted chest stab wound and was taken to a neighboring hospital. According to the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, the self-inflicted wound occurred at approximately 12:45 a.m., roughly when the 1912 axe murders in the home happened. Lorson recovered from his injuries but never spoke publicly about what happened that day. The Villisca Axe Murder House is still operating today. At the time of writing, the price of the overnight stay is $428, and anyone over the age of 12 can take a tour. The end.